Hi everyone, it's Amy here from the blog I Think Therefore I Teach. Welcome to your next Criminology instalment. This is for Unit 3 and it's 1.3. This is on how we actually process the evidence that we find. So I will make myself smaller. Should do it. Turn to the PowerPoint. Let's get going. So, explain how evidence is processed. This one's quite nice and straightforward, not as much content as 1.1 and 1.2. And so obviously this is now on to 1.3. I asked my students, first of all, I did this on a previous PowerPoint as well. Imagine you are the first professional on the scene of a knife attack outside a nightclub which has left a man dead. The attacker ran away before you arrived. After securing the scene, what evidence might you look for and how would you collect and process it? So I gave my students some time to discuss and talk about this, and some of the things they might talk about are things like the position of the body, the blood splatters, footprints, weapons, fingerprints, fibres, saliva, CCTV, witnesses, loads and loads. This is a bit of a recap on from the 1.2 as well that you've already done. Second one. Imagine you are the first professional on the scene in the case of a burglary. A house has been broken into and various electrical items stolen. A window was broken in the course of the break-in, leaving traces of blood. Someone is already trying to sell items on social media matching the description of those stolen. What evidence would you look for and how would you again collect and process it? So an example might be CCTV. Is there any CCTV that could show you somebody coming to and from the building? Fingerprints, footprints, tyre prints, fibres, DNA, glass fragmentations, witnesses. So this topic, this is how evidence is processed. The types: physical, testimonial, and the processes are collection, transfer, storage, analysis, and personnel. So these are the areas that you need to know about. We're going to explore how different types of evidence are collected and processed. We are going to reference some of the case studies that we've already done with a few new ones. We're going to look at Barry George, Amanda Knox again, Sally Clark, Angela Cannings as well. So some of these you will already have covered, but it's very, very important that you do know your case studies and how they apply. What we already know is this. We already know that personnel and techniques are mostly concerned with catching the perpetrators, the criminals, and collecting uncontaminated evidence. So this topic focuses on how to do the uncontaminated part. There are two types: physical or real evidence, actual evidence you gather. The second are testimonials. These are from witnesses, from people, from the victims, from experts, defendants, etc. So we start by looking at Locard's exchange principle, or Locard's exchange principle. Edmund Locard, 1877 to 1976, he came up with the principle that every contact leaves a trace. There will be some trace on the scene of the crime on the victim. So there will be some evidence on the victim. There will also be some evidence on the offender. Some trace of victim on the offender as well, some trace of the offender on the victim. Obviously those things work when it's like a murder or contact, whereas obviously it's a burglary and there may not be no victim there at that time, then it would just be the offender. Paul Kirk adds that wherever the offender steps, whatever he touches, whatever he leaves, even unconsciously, will serve as a silent witness against him. So this is what professionals use. This is what inspires them to the understanding that there will definitely be something there. They just have to find it. So we start with physical evidence. The police officer usually is first at the scene. It's their job to secure it, to protect it and preserve it until the SOCO arrives, the SOCO arrives. The SOC code, the SOCO, obviously are the scene of crime officers. So a police who are the first on the scene, because obviously you ring the police first and foremost, they have to protect, make sure that nobody leaves, but make sure nothing actually gets changed or altered. The SOCO then use their expertise to collect and transfer the evidence, to a forensic laboratory for analysis. Forensic scientists or forensic specialists then analyse the evidence. There are special factors to consider with outdoor scenes of crime as well. And again, I get my students to discuss what those would be. What is the difference between an indoor crime and an outdoor crime? And some of the things they might say is that it's very hard to secure the evidence. There's a lot more things in play for securing the evidence. Contamination, people, animals, the weather, the wind, the rain, the sun. Sun might change something as the wind or the rain might wash things away or move things. So an outdoor crime scene is a lot harder to actually contain than an indoor crime scene. Bodily fluids, tissue, so anything that has DNA, saliva, anything at all that has DNA. Blood, you need to allow it to dry at room temperature. You need to keep the clothing items unfolded, because if you fold it, it will then go into different parts. It might transfer, be weaker, and then placed in evidence bags. You need to package these items individually, so you need to send for analysis within 24 hours. So this needs to be a very, very quick turnaround. People need to be extremely efficient. Semen, you need to allow it to dry on items of like fabric. You need to place in a paper bag, seal it, then seal it in a plastic bag. So you've got double sealing there. If the person has been sexually assaulted, they should be seen by a doctor ASAP for swabs to be taken. This is one of the very hard things. This is often why, as we've discovered earlier on Criminology, that rape cases are very, very hard to do, because obviously if you are sexually assaulted, one of the first things you'll do is shower. They say that's one of the worst things you can do, because obviously it's the most natural thing that you want to do, but you cannot get rid of that evidence. That evidence is what they need to be able to, bodily fluids is one of the strongest things to find the perpetrator. These need to be make sure that the bags with evidence are carefully labelled and sent to the forensics for analysis. They must be bagged separately. You can't cross-contaminate. Saliva, the swabs, they need to have a swab and then a packaged carefully in evidence bags, sent off again for DNA analysis at a laboratory. And then hairs, these should be picked up from the victim or the suspect using tweezers and bagged. Fabric with hairs on should be put in paper bags and sealed. And again, DNA can be taken from hair root cells, so there's a lot of DNA in hair. And this can also indicate the race of the person as well as the body part of the hair is from, so you can get a lot from hair as well. But as we just said, when it's outdoors, things like hair can blow away, blood can be easily disguised, so this is not an easy task to do. Fingerprints, these are extremely valuable, and again I get my students to discuss why. One reason is because they are unique. Everyone's fingerprints are unique to them. Even identical twins that have, identical material and that's nearly exactly the same, they will have different fingerprints. Fingers and retinas are different. These are made up of the patterns of tiny ridges on the skin, and a lot of time and effort is put into finding and preserving them. You can also find unique palm, toe and foot sole prints as well. Databases that we've looked at in previous topics like Indenti log them so that searches can be done to see if there's a match. And then I get my students to try their own. So we rob the science labs, take all their ink pads and have a go at finding our own fingerprints. So the three types of fingerprints, sorry, I don't know why that bit's on the bottom is not timed properly. We have latent. These are not visible to the naked eye. They are a result of natural oils in the skin. They are revealed using special powders. So if you've ever watched CSI or any of these murder programs, they will go around with a duster. They're dusting for fingerprints. Powder consists of magnesium plus an adhesive chemical. It can also be revealed under ultraviolet light. They are then photographed. So that's what they are, and then what happens to them is they are photographed. They are then lifted with a sticky sheet, preserved on an acetate sheet, sent for analysis as well. So that process, especially if you get to try it in your classes, that process isn't actually that easy. Finding a fingerprint, dusting it off, getting it to stick and then transferring it to the sheet is actually quite difficult to do. And so especially if you have one fingerprint, you cannot get this wrong. You have patent, these are positive prints. By that it means that they are visible, usually because they are left on a substance such as blood, oil, paint, dust, ink, like windows. You can see fingerprints on windows and things. So these are things that are visible to the naked eye. They are first of all photographed and then again sent for analysis. Finally, you have plastic. These are prints that are 3D. Plastic because they are moulded, being made in a soft substance such as clay, soil, or a putty on a windowsill. So, for example, if the murder or something's around something like clay, they might leave physically moulded fingerprints, physically moulded footprints. First photographed, and again a cast is then made, so you can put something into it and get a cast from it, then sent once more for a forensic lab analysis. Impression evidence, so the result of any pressure, so the other things that might leave pressure marks. You first of all have bite marks. These are first swabbed in the case where there might be some saliva or DNA. Then marks are photographed. Sometimes a cast may be taken to a forensic odontologist or forensic dentist. We've looked at them in previous topics as well. If there's a suspect, their teeth can have a cast taken and compared, mostly found after a sexual or physical assault. Now, when I was talking to my students in a previous topic, and I think I've mentioned in one of these videos, one of the things they always say, and it's very macabre and it's a horrible thing to think about, but if you are ever attacked, you need to either leave fingerprints or bite marks, because you can get DNA under your fingerprints that they can then trace, or bite marks. You can get their skin into your teeth, you can leave a bite mark on them, and so bite marks or finger marks are a real way of linking to your victim to the offender. Shoe prints. These are useful as they can indicate size of offender's feet, the footwear, probable sex, and approximate height. Because obviously, women's feet normally between about 4 and 7. Men's feet are obviously going to be bigger, so you can tell by the size of the footprint roughly what their sex is, but you can also tell their approximate height. So you can often, by the indentation, how much indentation could show how much they weigh, their height, because often the size of your foot is linked to how tall you are. If an impression is left in a substance like soil, a cast can be made. If they're made in a liquid, it can be photographed and kept in a national footwear reference collection, which is a database, again, there's police who use. Tyre marks can be matched to a specific vehicle, as over time tyres develop distinctive and unique marks in their tread due to wear and tear. If found on the road or soil, photographs taken and a cast be made. If a suspect vehicle is found, the tread can then be compared. You can also tell kind of the age of a car. If the tread's excellent, chances are it's a newer car, or the tyres have just been changed recently. So again, it gives you an idea of if you think the tyres have been changed recently, all local garages that have just done a new set of tyres, or if you think it's a newer car, all the garages that have just recently sold that car of that specific type with those specific tyres. So again, it gives you an idea. Trace evidence. These are the little bits of evidence. Any chemical or material left by the offender at the scene of the crime or on the victim. Could be traces left from the victim on the offender or their property. Could include flakes of paint, soil, glass particles, fibres, drugs or poisons, gunshot residue. And so again, we recap at this point the Barry George, who was believed to have accused of killing Jill Dando, and the residue that was found in that case. Paint. Paint is placed in evidence bags and sealed in labels set off for analysis. There are many subtle differences in chemical composition and colour that can be matched. So I don't know if any of you, I've been redecorating my house over the summer. So I don't know if any of you have ever been to that B&Q where they can actually match. You take something in and they can use this fancy machine and they can match paint to it identically. If they have paint that is unique, a unique colour that's obviously not just like your normal paints off the shelf, they could then go to somewhere like B&Q and say, has somebody had this colour made? And B&Q actually keep a database of all of those colours, and so they could then trace it potentially to the people that have had that colour made. Glass. Glass has backward fragmentation if it is smashed, leaving tiny particles flying towards the person who broke it. Analysis of clothing can find these. And again, this is why the case of Amanda Knox is so frustrating. Meredith Kircher is so frustrating because they smashed a window, but then their clothes were never taken. Things like this were never analysed. Tiny fibres from clothes, seats, carpets can be found and lifted carefully using tweezers. This is how we found the Stephen Lawrence killers in the end, because of the fibres that they had on their clothes. Tiny blood splatters. Put in bags, paper evidence bags, sealed and labelled. Fibres are distinctive, natural or synthetic dyes, manufacturing process. They can also provide good evidence. Finally, soil. Soil can be analysed to find out the composition, and this can help place people at certain places. Soil can differ a lot, even in a small area. So, in groups, my class then got a different crime, a description of a crime and the photographs, and they had to then use their knowledge to work out how the evidence would be bagged, stored, transferred, what to look for, what equipment would be needed, etc. So we just kind of put it into practice. Testimonial, so the last section of this, so the testimonial, the testimonies, this is the voice, this is the people. First of all, you have testimonial evidence. This is written or spoken accounts given by the witnesses. This can include victims themselves and be used as evidence in court. A witness can be asked to testify in court during a trial. Prior to the trial, the prosecution and defence must show each other any written statements they might use and a list of people they might call to testify. If the prosecution and defence both accept the statements, then these may only be read to the jury instead. During the trial, both prosecution and defence can cross-examine witnesses. So it's a fairly traumatic experience, certainly if you are the victim yourself. Vulnerable witnesses. So I got my students to explain what they classed or what they thought were vulnerable witnesses. Under 18s are vulnerable because they're not adults. Someone related to the victim who has died from the crime. So hence why in the Stephen Lawrence case, the the interrogation that Dwayne, his best friend, experienced, who was the person there, and you know, Stephen Lawrence died in his arms. Then his dad died, I think, the day before the trial. All of this really impacted, and again, that's why Stephen Lawrence's trial took so long to get to the conclusion. Victims of serious crimes, mental illness, disability. People can give evidence via video link or pre-recorded statements or from behind a screen as well. There's certain things, though, that are inadmissible in court. These include hearsay, people hearing things. Oh, well, I heard so-and-so say that he's guilty. So, for example, the Hogg case, I can't remember her first name, but the woman that was murdered and found under the bath in her house. Everybody in the community knew who had killed I can't remember what her first name is, it's going to book me now. You're all shouting it at the screen. We'll call her Ms. Hogg. Everyone knew in the community who had killed Miss Hogg, and but that's just hearsay. You can't say, well, I've seen them and they're behaving differently, or we know him about society and he could do something like this, or he was linked to the person. No, it's all hearsay. That's why, again, it took so long to get him, and it wasn't until later on that they actually were able to convict him. This is when a witness is repeating what someone else has told them, second-hand information or rumour. Also forcibly obtained confessions, including entrapment, torture. The law says such evidence cannot be used in court. So finally, I got my students at this point to start filling out their grid sheets. So to start filling out the different sections of this, because that's the topic. That's everything that you will need in order to do your controlled assessments for the second year. Hopefully you found that useful. If you do have any comments or questions, please feel free to drop them below. If you liked this video, give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe as well so that you never miss out on videos, because I am going to try and keep on top of them so that you get regular updates for the units as we go through towards your controlled assessment. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye for now.